And thanks for being here for our Straight Talk South Carolina lecture series that's presented by the Riley Institute and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here at Furman. I'm Nancy Kennedy. I'm the director of OLLI at Furman. I'm glad to see all of you. In 1993, Furman University created Fuller, Furman University Learning and Retirement. That first year, there were 65 members. We had 1,775 last year, so we've grown a little bit. 7 courses were offered that first term, and this fall in our brochures, which are available out in the lobby, we have 99 courses available for all of you to take. But we don't just offer courses. Our members enjoy social events, special interest groups, bonus lectures and trips, and so much more. As our program grew, we were able to increase our variety of offerings, and we also attracted the attention of the Osher Foundation, which provided a $2 million endowment gift to help us support our program. We changed our name at that point to OLLI at Furman, continue to grow, and we've used that gift to do a lot for the program here at Furman. More recently, we've found ways to reach out into the community while educating our membership on the issues of today. Senior Leaders Greenville is an OLLI-developed program that will soon welcome its second class, educating senior adults about issues in our community and empowering them to be a voice for the senior population here in Greenville. And then we also have this program, Straight Talk South Carolina. This is our 5th year of a wonderful partnership with the Riley Institute. We're proud to present this important series on crime and punishment this summer, and glad you're here to join in the conversation. And now I'd like to welcome Mark Quinn to get us started with tonight's program.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see a full room again here this Tuesday for the 3rd week of our summer series. We think back to the first week, many of you were here, and we were treated to a number of staggering statistics about the growth of incarceration in America over the last 30 years, how our prison populations have skyrocketed, and how that might have had some unintended consequences, both socially and economically. You might recall, threw out a statistic that our state spends a little more than $550 million each year just on the Department of Corrections. Does not include probation and parole or to treat the mentally ill. Last week, fascinating conversation with 2 very important law enforcement officials, the chief of police from Charleston, the sheriff from Richland County, talking about that fine balance between tough community policing, law and order, and yet maintaining people's civil rights. So much of what we see and hear about in the news here of late. But we were also treated to some sobering statistics about our treatment of the mentally ill in South Carolina and how many are behind bars and not really receiving the rehabilitation treatment that they might otherwise deserve if we distributed justice in perhaps a different kind of way. And so we transition and pivot to week number 3, where we talk about the rehabilitative justice and the new war on drugs. 30 years ago, when the American people and elected officials decided to get really tough on the war on drugs, they had unintended consequences as well. Prison population in our federal prisons skyrocketing, as well as our state prisons. Many people first-time, nonviolent drug offenders. And here of late, on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats asking, are we getting the most out of our tax dollars? Is this the best way to treat people who are in trouble? If you think about addiction as a brain disease or as a type of mental illness, then many folks ask, is there a better way? Is there a more creative way to keep people not behind bars, but to allow them to be productive citizens, making our entire society a better place to live? So to start off this first part of our conversation tonight, it is my honor to introduce you to the Honorable Bruce Howie Hendricks. She is the U.S. District Judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina. And what you're going to hear about is a program that began about 5 years ago called the Bridge Program. It's an innovative supervision and rehabilitation program for defendants whose criminal conduct appears to be motivated by substance abuse and addiction. So ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Bruce Hendricks.
Okay. Well, good evening. When my staff and I considered how to start a conversation about federal drug courts, is this too loud, everybody? We good? We were looking for a partner known for smart policy solutions and bipartisanship, and you really can't do better than the Policy Institute named for Dick Riley, who, like few others, has elevated the public and political discourse and put policy over partisanship. So to Secretary Riley, Jill Fuson, Don Gordon, and the other outstanding staff of the Riley Institute, thank you very much for the work you're doing with us. Thank you also to Furman University and Ollie for hosting and sponsoring this series. As one who has spent her entire career in criminal justice, first as a federal prosecutor and then as a magistrate and district court judge, it lifts my heart that so many of you have come out night after night to have a serious conversation, not just about crime and punishment, but about solutions. The solution I'm going to discuss tonight, drug courts, is innovative and relatively new in the federal court system. The pilot program that we started in Charleston in 2010 was one of the first federal drug courts in the country, and it generated a lot of excitement. We've hosted Attorney General Eric Holder, the Criminal Law Committee of the United States, and United States attorneys from jurisdictions across the country. But drug courts are not a new idea, and we in the federal court didn't invent them. They began in Miami in 1989, and even as this country was swept up in the war on drugs, the war on crime, and mass incarceration, these courts spread throughout the state court systems for one simple reason: they worked. So while I'm proud to promote drug courts at the federal court level, I want to acknowledge that they were developed in the laboratories of democracy, the states. They were developed by courageous judges like our own Chuck Simmons, who took a chance on a compassionate policy back at a time when the winds were blowing the opposite direction. Let me begin by briefly recapping the crisis facing our criminal justice system. Our incarceration rate is unprecedented, both historically and internationally. From 1972 to 2013, the prison population nearly octupled. Although the United States comprises only 5% of the world's population, the land of the free holds 25% of the world's prisoners. Our closest second, Rwanda, is a country where 1 million people were killed in 100 days, and their penal system has had to deal with that. What, we should ask, is our reason for locking up so many of our citizens in the United States? When compared with many of our closest allies, countries with a comparable standard of living, we are completely off the chart. The implications of this trend are troubling. First, as Dr. Thompson explained to us 2 weeks ago, not only are we an international outlier in the total number of people we incarcerate, but the impact falls disproportionately on our most vulnerable communities, particularly communities of color, whose members comprise 60% of those behind bars. At current rates, 1 in 3 black men will be incarcerated compared to 1 in 17 white men. Second, incarceration is extremely expensive. This graph compares state spending on the average prisoner, shown in blue, to state spending on the average school child, shown in yellow. In an extreme example, for the average price of incarcerating a prisoner in the state of New York, you could pay full tuition, room, and board at Harvard University. The cost of incarceration in the federal system is lower than New York, but still over $30,000 a year. Now, while that won't buy you a Furman education anymore, it's more than enough to cover the full cost of attendance at any state school in South Carolina and many of the smaller private schools as well. And keep in mind also that federal prisons are 40% over capacity and are projected to be 55% over capacity if something doesn't change. And as you've heard, overcrowded prisons create problems of their own. In light of these facts, we should ask, how is the return on our nation's $80 billion a year investment in prisons? It's terrible. What returns is the overwhelming majority of the prisoners we incarcerate. Specifically, more than half of all prisoners are rearrested again within a year of being released from prison. By 3 years, it's 2/3, and by 5 years, it's more than 3/4. Now, I'm not suggesting that prisons aren't necessary. As a federal prosecutor, before I became a judge, I went after some dangerous folks, bank robbers, etc., including members of the Ku Klux Klan who burned African American churches, major drug smugglers, and members of a motorcycle gang, the Hells Angels, who tried to take out a house on Myrtle Beach with an anti-tank rocket. Some people need to be in jail, but even with mass incarceration and even in the federal system, the reality is that the vast majority of those incarcerated will return back home and live among us in the community. The only way we can really keep our communities safe is to help these people to find a new way of life and a place in the community, which is exactly what drug courts seek to do. So what is a drug court? A drug court is a special docket for low-level criminal defendants whose criminal behavior is motivated by a substance addiction. If you've seen The Wire, think of the character Bubbles. In one of his early scenes, we see Bubbles cutting out money that he has printed on white office paper to buy heroin. He's pouring coffee on it to try to give it that money feel. Believe it or not, I've had a drug court participant who tried to do something similar. Running 20s on a personal printer, he got charged in federal court with counterfeiting. On the other hand, someone like Walter White from Breaking Bad is not being motivated by an addiction and is not a good candidate for drug court. Drug courts work on the theory that if addiction is motivating the crime, you can stop the crime by treating the addiction. And in this country, we have a growing addiction crisis. In particular, a heroin crisis that is linked directly to prescription painkillers. This healthcare to heroin pipeline is ensnaring people who would otherwise have no reason to get involved with illegal drugs. We see it in court again and again. Someone has surgery, takes pain medications, gets hooked, and when they are cut off from the pills, they turn to heroin. So, there were 4 people that died, students at the College of Charleston last year, heroin overdoses. So, you may be wondering, how does someone get into drug court? We have a drug court team that's comprised of a judge and her staff, a federal prosecutor, a public defender, a drug treatment provider, a United States probation officer, and a clerk of court. The team screens cases using criteria designed to ensure that we accept only participants whose crime is connected to their addiction and who can be safely managed in the community. Now, participation in our drug court is voluntary. Of course, there's a substantial incentive to participate, as those who graduate typically receive a non-custodial sentence or have their charges dismissed altogether. Now, while in the program, they must participate in substance abuse treatment, regularly attend self-help meetings such as Narcotics Anonymous, find themselves a sponsor or mentor, and seek to become involved in the community, seek employment and or pursue fully their education. They must avoid drugs and alcohol and submit to regular and random drug testing. Now, to ensure that these requirements are followed, these participants must come to court every 2 weeks and report to me. And to show you how this is done, let me call on one of my former participants, Mr. William White, and members of my drug court team here in Greenville to role play for me. Good evening, Mr. White. Have you used drugs or alcohol since the last time we were together?
No.
And have you been working?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Did you bring verification of your hours?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Oh, how could I forget? Let's see. Gosh, just a second. We got to have the full effect. There we go. Okay, it's official. All right. So what step are you working on, Mr. White?
I'm on my 8th step.
And what step is that?
That's we made a list of all persons we are harming, became willing to make amends to them all.
And how is your relationship with your sponsor going?
Very good relationship.
How about your hobbies? What have you been doing with your spare time?
Got a lot of grass.
Let me call on our United States Probation Officer, Mr. Brent Metcalf. Mr. Metcalf, can you please provide a report to the court as to how Mr. White is doing?
Your Honor, we have two issues. We have an issue. Mr. White has informed me and the court that he has participated in all of his self-help group meetings this week. Unfortunately, we have a dishonesty issue. Mr. White has not participated in those 3 meetings. He's only participated in 2. So we have a technical violation issue, but we also have an issue with dishonesty.
Let me hear from the government. Madam United States Attorney, Ms. Howard.
Your Honor, I'm very concerned about his lack of candor with the court and stating here before Your Honor that he has attended all of his sessions and had the documentation for it, and he does not have anything to support that. I think a sanction is in order, Your Honor.
Do you have a recommended sanction, Mr. Metcalf?
Yes, Your Honor, I do. I think that 50 hours community service would be appropriate, and we can arrange for 50 hours to be completed at the county landfill.
Mr. Price? Mr. Price for the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. White is well aware that when you enter in this program that there are consequences for doing things that he's not supposed to do. But I would ask you to consider some things. Number one, consider what this is not. He did not use drugs. He did not use alcohol. He did not reoffend. So I think those are things in his favor. I would ask you also to consider the length of time and the success that he has had in this program, the joy that he has brought to all of us while he's been in this program, and the positive attitude. Knowing him like I do, and I'm sure the court is aware, anyone in this program, I think, is going to have a bump in the road as one proceeds on down. And I would ask the court to consider this to be just a bump in the road. In my opinion, this is aberrant behavior.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Well, having considered all of the arguments and the information from the U.S. Probation Officer, it is a bump in the road, but a bump it is. And so I'm going to order 20 hours of community service at the county landfill, Mr. White, and next time there's a dishonesty issue, because you know how important honesty is to the court, it'll be a weekend in jail. But let's do the 20 hours community service at the landfill and have it done by the next time we're in court. Thank you, Mr. White. Well, Mr. White not only graduated from our program in Charleston and had no such bumps in the road, he comes back regularly to encourage the current participants, and even came when the Attorney General was in town for the drug court. In a few minutes, you'll have a chance to hear directly from William and another of our graduates that's here tonight, Malia Carney, both of whom are dear to our team. As you can imagine, this process, as you can see, is built on trust, and we demand honesty above all else from our participants. We understand and expect that some of them will relapse, and while there are always consequences for that, we are willing to work with them as long as they do so openly and honestly. We use a system of both carrots and sticks. For participants who do fulfill their responsibilities, there's recognition and small rewards each time they come to court. It seems silly, but it's candy, cosmetics, calendars, books, neckties, because I require them to all wear coats and ties, and other small tokens. For those who don't, there are escalating sanctions, including meetings, written reports, community service, as you just heard, jail time, and if necessary, expulsion from the program. You might say to yourself, well, this all sounds kind of hokey, and you get a necktie for following the law and a night in jail for breaking it. But we are committed to evidence-based practices, and here's what the research and the evidence tells us. Small rewards and small sanctions consistently, reliably, and immediately applied are more effective than big rewards or big punishments that are remote or uncertain. 10 years in jail is just a number when it's 6 months away and uncertain. But a night in jail is a big deal when that night is tonight and you're wearing handcuffs. In the traditional criminal justice system, there's usually a couple of months, if not years, between getting caught, getting punishment. But in our court, it's a matter of days, sometimes hours or weeks. And if you still think this program sounds soft or easy, consider this. I've had people quit. They know that as soon, even if they quit, they know that as soon as they do quit, they've got to go back in front of their original judge for sentencing, and they still quit because the program is hard. And I've had people say, I'll take a felony conviction in prison because this is too hard. The program's really like addiction boot camp. And while I don't enjoy it, I will not hesitate to sanction a participant, especially for dishonesty. Now let me give you a real life example, true to life, from a recent drug court experience in Charleston. We had 2 participants graduating, and we had invited all sorts of dignitaries and members of the bar, judges, and celebrate with us. And the Honorable Judge Chuck Simmons was there to speak, driven all the way down to Charleston. The courtroom was packed. And one of my participants had gotten in trouble with law enforcement and then had lied to the court about it. But it wasn't the first time. And he was smart, he was hardworking, but he just couldn't tell the truth. And this was the last straw. So he stood before me that day, a packed courtroom, balloons and cake for the graduation, but I confronted him. And he was crying and begging for another chance. But I had to tell him no. I ordered the United States Marshals to take him into custody right then and there in the middle of the celebration. They walked over, asked him to remove his coat and tie, empty his pockets, and put his hands behind his back, and they marched him out of that crowded courtroom in handcuffs, and he was done. He was expelled from the program for repeat dishonesty and sent back to his original judge for sentencing. But let me tell you a much happier story now. We recently had a gentleman graduate in Charleston who had been described as the worst heroin addict our treatment counselors had ever seen. He was in his early 30s and had been hooked on heroin for more than half of his life. His family had tried everything, but they couldn't keep him in treatment. He had a long, hard road through the bridge program. I had to lock him up several times. He spent 6 months in inpatient treatment, and there was no quitting because he knew where he was going. If he quit, he was going to go to jail, but he hung in there. At one point, he even broke his hand, but refused pain medications so he wouldn't compromise his own recovery, and he kept working so he wouldn't lose his job. When he graduated after 2 years, his father stood up and spoke quietly but powerfully. His father talked about how he and his wife used to wait terrified for the inevitable knock on the door that would bring them the news that their son was dead. He said getting indicted on federal charges was the best thing that ever happened to his son, and his son, the defendant, agreed with him and thanked us. Okay, that's all nice, warm fuzzies, kumbaya. Show me the money. Well, thanks to the state court pioneers like Judge Simmons, we have 25 years of evidence and studies to prove that the success that we see is borne out in the data and in the dollars. And these studies show that drug courts reduce the recidivism rate by more than half. It's estimated that 75% of those who graduate from their drug courts will never see another set of handcuffs. Now, you might be wondering, how do you know this this isn't just selection bias, that you're not just picking the good ones, and couldn't this all just be evidence that drug treatment works? Do you really need a drug court? Well, to answer these questions, a team of researchers from the National Institute of Justice did a 5-year study of adult drug courts entitled the Multi-Site Adult Drug Court Evaluation. They compared outcomes for over 1,100 drug court participants in 23 programs with outcomes for over 600 similarly situated individuals in other types of drug treatment programs. And here's what they found. Drug court participants reported less criminal activity, were arrested less frequently, reported less drug use, were significantly less likely to test positive for drugs, were significantly more likely to be employed, and reported less family conflict than the comparison group. And we know that something about the combination of treatment, supervision, and close judicial accountability produces powerful results. As Dr. Josh Smith of the Medical University of South Carolina puts it, drug courts succeed where treatment and traditional courts fail because they draw the best from each other. As for saving money, a 3-year study showed that drug courts saved New York $254 million. Georgia estimates that a drug court sentence saves it $10,000 per participant. Drug courts produce an average of $2.21 in direct benefits to the justice system for every $1 invested. And when community savings are added, savings increase to $27 for every $1 invested. If you find that last figure shocking, consider not only the savings for the justice system, but for the health care system, the foster care system, the education system, and every system that's negatively affected by addiction and everything that comes with addiction. As Senator Malloy stressed a few weeks ago, it's important that we get out in front of the problem by reinvesting the money we're saving into programs that will reduce the need for criminal enforcement. And since I have the podium, let me offer my 2 cents, if you don't mind, about where some of these savings should go. The medical community tells us that the causes of addiction are multiple and complex. It's not a simple germ that can be eradicated, and there's no miracle cure, no good science to prevent addiction. But here is what we do know. About a quarter of children under the age of 6 live in families below the poverty line, and almost half of all children under 6 live in low-income families. Many are deprived of good early childhood education at the most important years of their development. Not only are these the years where the cognitive skills, language development, and learning skills are instilled, but they are the years where the basic rules of the playground are learned, the characteristics we later refer to as character, ethics, and morals. It's interesting to note that many of the countries with the lowest incarceration rates are also those with the best systems of public early childhood education. And now at this point, no one can say for sure to what extent early childhood education would reduce addiction and crime, but I think it's safe to assume it would vastly improve our society, and I think I can probably get an amen from my friends at the Riley Institute on that point. There are some who'd say, well, I might be able to get on board with drug courts and state court, but are they really needed in the federal court? I thought federal inmates were serious criminals who needed to be locked up forever. Do we really need another federal program to pay for when the vast majority of criminals are in the state system? These are fair questions, but the answers might surprise you. There are drug treatment programs in the federal prisons, but federal prisons, as I told you earlier, are dangerously overcrowded, and as a result, there are not enough spots in the drug treatment programs. As of 2011, there were almost twice as many people on the waiting list in these programs. But these programs are so overburdened that 25% of those who graduate are not able to take full advantage of it. Think about the irony of this. A program meant to relieve prison congestion is failing because our prisons are so congested. Additionally, I think there's something qualitatively different about recovering in prison versus recovering in the real world. I'm not suggesting that drugs and addiction aren't a problem in prison. I've prosecuted people for dealing drugs in prison, but prison is a structured environment, so the fact that a person might get clean there doesn't mean that they can stay clean when they get out in the real world and back home where their stressors are. One of the great things about drug courts is that they teach people to manage their addictions in the real world where they live and work. Short on time. Okay. So, if you can see, I think, Chris, if you can get to the slide dealing with property and drug offense, if you set aside immigration offenses, which are really their own separate issue, the two types of crime charged most often in federal court are property offenses and drug offenses. And guess what categories of offenders have the highest recidivism rates? Property and drug offenders. And who are these people? A lot of them, if not most of them, are addicts. Remember Bubbles printing money? That's counterfeiting, and it's a federal crime. So is vandalizing a mailbox, stealing a prescription pad, and a lot of other shockingly stupid offenses that addicts commit. You've got people who are desperate to feed a habit, and they aren't thinking about whether they're violating state or federal law. They're just doing whatever it takes to get that fix. So, what about cost? Well, federal drug courts almost certainly save even more money per participant than state programs simply because the average federal sentence is so much longer. We started our program in 2010 when budgets were completely frozen, and we just used existing resources. But when treatment costs are minimal compared to prison, and in most cases, probation would be paying for drug treatment anyway. We conducted an analysis to figure out how much money we're saving. We were conservative, and we even went so far as to calculate the value of our own time, which is a fixed cost. Subtracting that figure and our treatment cost from the amount saved by not incarcerating those same people, we estimate we were saving and are saving an average of $17,000 per participant, not per graduate, but per participant. So where do we go from here? Well, to start with, we need to have drug courts available in the federal system across the country, and with support from the Department of Justice, they're beginning to grow. In South Carolina, we now have programs in Greenville, Charleston, Florence, and Columbia. And I think that we might be the first state to actually have federal drug courts statewide. Second, we need to think about how the drug court model, counseling and supervision, coupled with close judicial accountability, can be used in other contexts as an alternative to incarceration. You're starting to see this happen, for example, as Judge Simmons has implemented a veterans court and their mental health courts, and Judge Simmons is going to talk about the veterans court he started. Finally, we need to use the problem-solving courts as a venue to connect the public with people who are struggling to get clean, to stay clean, and people who are trying to put their lives back together. One thing that was critical to the success of the Charleston program, and what I'm seeing so far in Greenville as well, was community engagement. We had people from the community volunteer to mentor our participants, help them find jobs, housing, and transportation. We even had a successful attorney who was so moved by the story of one of our graduates that he's helping to pay for her to go to college. And perhaps most importantly, we had people there to encourage the participants, to remind them that they were not their mistakes or a label given to them by the system, and to speak hope to them. As Victor Hugo wrote in Les Mis, what is said about men often has as much influence upon their lives and especially upon their destinies as what they do. We've seen this to be true time and time again. And I want to invite anyone here who wants to see drug courts in action to come to my courts or to one of Judge Simmons's courts. And we have flyers here in the back with the dates, and we'd love to have you come join us. In conclusion, it might seem weird that a program that emphasizes treatment over punishment and offers rewards in addition to sanctions would be successful, but it works. In these results, we see an ironic but familiar pattern that sometimes mercy succeeds where justice fails, that a pinch of free kindness may be worth a pound of costly punishment, and that when we return good where evil is expected, people change for the better. Thank you.
Hey.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Malia Carney.
Hi.
And Mr. William White, who you've met previously. Ms. Carney, briefly describe your background.
My drug addiction background, it's actually started in my late 20s. Diet pills of all things, believe it or not, prescription diet pills, which led to painkillers and much harder medications that I was actually able to obtain illegally because I was a nurse. And it just spiraled down from there, which led to more and more criminal
You were a
activity.
nurse.
I was a nurse.
Describe for me, Ms. Carney, the charges and the sentence you were facing before you entered the Bridge program.
Okay. A conspiracy to distribute heroin and 2 counts of using the phone in the commission of a crime, and I was looking at 20 years to life.
What made you choose to enter the Bridge program, and did you think that it would work and that you would be successful with it?
I was hoping it would work when I would learn some of the what was going to be required of me, with the criteria I was going to have to meet when I got out of jail. I was hoping, I was scared to death because there was so much that I had to get done and so much I was going to be accountable for. But I was determined I was not going back to jail. So.
How would you describe the difficulty of the program, and why do you think the program requires the things that we required of you?
As drug addicts, we live extremely unstructured lifestyles, extremely unstructured, which is why the structure of the drug court is so important and necessary to our recovery. It's overwhelming at times, but once you learn to embrace it, you learn to love it, and that's how we continue to survive and heal.
For one day you told us a story about how you were sitting on a bench waiting for a bus.
In the rain.
In the rain, because you had to get to drug court, and how onerous riding the bus all around town was. And then all of a sudden, can you just tell us about that?
About getting to drug court that day?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never taken public transportation before. I came from a very privileged life. I had no reason to take the route that I took. But I didn't realize that you had to stand in the pouring rain or the snow, whatever it would take to get downtown, and to taking the different routes to get on the trolleys, to go here, to go there. And I was thinking, I just don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if I make it, but I just continued.
And you were angry about the requirements.
Yeah,
as
it
I
made me
recall.
mad. But that was in the early weeks. And then, like I said, I then realized this is exactly what I need. It was, yeah.
All right, how did you benefit from the program?
Oh my gosh, where can I begin? I feel like it's a brand new me. Has anybody heard the Alicia Keys song, Brand New Kind of Me? That's me. That was my theme song for a while when I first got out, because I didn't know myself for so many years. I didn't know myself. I didn't know my family, just trudging through life. Now I feel like I have self-worth. I feel like I'm a good person. I have something to offer. You know, I feel like I can breathe. Everything. I always use the analogy. The colors are brighter. The wind feels different on my skin. Pain hurts a lot worse. Emotional pain hurts a lot worse when you're not high. But it's all worth it. I love my life now.
The relationship with your daughter is
yes,
A plus.
Yeah. She was really mad because I actually went to jail in the first place. And when I got out of jail, I went to surprise her. Mommy's home. No, I didn't get greeted with that. I got greeted with, I'm really, really angry with you. So I knew at that time I just had to prove to her that I could do this. And when she saw me adhering to the requirements, that's when we began to heal and get back together.
What was your, and what is your view of the roles of the drug court team, the probation officer, the prosecutor, defense counsel?
It's a well-oiled machine. And they all know exactly what we need, and they're all rooting for us. It's a combination of structure, discipline, and you know what? Hey, we got your back, and we're going to make sure you survive it.
What are you doing now?
I am actually in school, and I'm working full-time, and I'm apparently going to be a grandmother for the second time in the spring. So, yeah, living with my daughter.
How does your experience in Bridge help you? Does it continue to help you?
Oh, yes, every day, every day. And just the programs that we were, the 12-step programs that we attended have made life-changing. And we were discussing in the car on the way here. We don't even realize how we use the 12 steps in every day of our lives because it's so natural now. And, yeah, I make a reference to it every day of my life, yeah.
Great. All right. Mr. White, can you briefly tell us about your background?
Can y'all hear me? Okay, y'all can hear me. I started using drugs at the age of 12. Started off with Mad Dog 2020, and at the end of my road, I was using cocaine like 4 grams a day at the end of my road, yeah.
Well, describe for us your charges and the sentence you were facing before you entered the Bridge program.
Before I entered the Bridge program, I had already did time in the federal USP. So I believe I'm one of the first who went to prison and then ended up being in the drug court.
You were on supervised release.
I was on supervised release during that time. And I failed like 13 or 14 drug tests on the probation, you know, and I thought I was going back to prison for being, you know, getting high, you know, like, oh man, I going back to prison for getting high. But I ain't no good look in prison, just, you know, from my own experience, you know.
What made you choose to enter the Bridge program, and did you think it would work for you?
I took a risk. And plus my lawyer at the time was like, say yes. I was like, okay, you know. So I took a risk and stuff, and it was pretty cool, you know. It was different. I wasn't expecting to be in the drug court, you know.
How would you describe the difficulty of the Bridge requirements?
It took a lot. It took a lot because I had to do a lot of things. Go to work, go to the classes, make sure I get, you know, because I would have to call the color code. If my color was orange, so if my color came, I had to go take a drug test, you know, and you know, doing all these different things without a car, and it was very hard and stuff. But then I started getting used to it, and then make sure I attend meetings and stuff. I had to attend my meetings and all that. So you know, it was rough, but it got easy and stuff.
Why do you think the program requires those things?
It structure, a foundation. I look at drug court as the foundation of where my recovery started, in a way, when it got.
You had tested positive 13 times on supervised release. Okay, so then all of a sudden you joined Bridge. Can you talk about accountability some?
That's very, making sure I call somebody and show. I remember I had an ankle monitor on my ankle. That's accountability in itself, because they knew everywhere I was at. But accountability is very important, because I need to be accountable for where I'm at or where I'm doing. I kind of share that with my sponsees, like, you know, call me sometimes. I can see how you're doing. And I call my sponsor, you know, to be accountable, because my sponsor.
Now, you're saying you actually sponsor people yourself.
Accountability is very important, just period in life. Like I was accountable to tell my job, like, hey, listen, I need a couple of days off to go out of town. It was like, okay. But if I hadn't showed up, that's not being accountable. I used to not show up.
So how did you benefit from the program?
It has helped me a whole lot. Well, first, I never would have expected to be at a university speaking, so that no the drug. Never would have. You know, addiction took me to a federal prison in Kentucky. I believe they sent me to Kentucky. And recovery bring you to universities. So, you know, it's, you know, that's just my experience, you know. I never would have expected. Never would have expected.
And you met Attorney General Eric Holder yourself.
Yes, that's pretty cool.
How were your charges and sentence affected by your completion of the program, your supervised release?
I believe.
It was dismissed?
It was dismissed, yes. It was dismissed, and I think I haven't been on I wasn't on probation no more, none of that. I graduated in 2000.
No ankle monitor anymore.
No more ankle monitors and none of that. I was free. I always would tell her only a free man can walk on the battery with a judge, you know. I'm serious. No, you know, you can't do things like that when you're locked up, you know. You don't get opportunities to do things like that.
Because we walk after court.
Because we would walk after court, and I was like, I'm walking on a battery with a judge. I would always tell her that.
That was great. We'll do it again here in a couple of days. So what is your view of the roles of the bridge team and drug court team?
It's like a family type of thing. I feel very at home when I come there. You know, frequently I'll show up and stuff, and I feel at home, and y'all care, you know, because I didn't think nobody had cared, you know what I'm saying? I thought I was going to prison. The judge who sentenced me, he said, William, if you ever come back in front of me, I'm going to give you 10 years for whatever you do. And that stuck to my head when I had to go back in front of him, you know, before I was put in the drug court. I remember that. I was like, oh, he going to give me 10 years, man. You know, but so it's, you know, y'all showed that somebody cared, you know, and that, you know, y'all like my friends now. It's kind of weird, but who I couldn't, you know, I'm talking about, I got friends like her, you know, it's weird. I'm trying to tell you, it's crazy.
Well, I'm honored to be your friend, William. What are you doing now, and how has your experience in Bridge helped you?
As for like work and stuff, well, I work for the Greenery of Charleston. I just started that job 3 months ago. Being accountable. First job I've ever taken a drug test for, and I was able to pass it because I'm clean, you know. I've never done that ever in my whole entire history.
It's a good feeling.
I would pass up a lot of good jobs just because I didn't want to stop using, you know. So it was cool, and it was like, you know, you take a drug test. I was like, come on, let's go, you know. Very awesome, you know.
And you remain active with Bridge, obviously, we know, and come back often and mentor and sponsor some of our participants in Charleston. And why do you do that? And does that help you?
It helps me.
With
It helps
recovery?
me stay clean. They tell me I can only keep what I have by giving it away. So, you know, and I show up because I never know, some of the participants may be a part of my fellowship, just to show them, like, after drug court, recovery continues, you know. I know for me, I can't speak for, you know, any of them or make them, but I can just show them, like, this is what I have to do after drug court, you know.
So we especially need you to come to drug court on Thursday, because we've got some participants who are in some hot water.
Yeah, I need to come. Yeah, I'm gonna come. Yeah.
And William comes and they just really listen and look up to him. He's an example to them of success, and he knows he can talk to them better than I can. That's for sure.
The stuff I say to them, y'all can't hear. I get raw with them, like, listen. Giving to me like that, so I get raw, you know, and butt naked honest with them, like, listen, you keep doing that, you wouldn't want to go, cause see, and I'm gonna stop talking in a little while, cause I never used to really talk a lot, and I'm nervous, y'all. I must let y'all know that. I introduced myself in my meetings as an addict first, because I must remind myself what I am. Because if I don't remind myself of what I am, I will be 1595471 again. Never forget that number, you understand me? So I always keep up front that when I get any crazy thoughts to do, because the thoughts still come, you know. I must let y'all know, you know, I ain't cured, and there's no cure for this disease. You know, I still have thoughts I want to use, but what I've learned is when I want to use, I tell somebody who's clean. Can't go to the dope man until I want to get high. He gonna get me high. I gotta go to a meeting and share, like, hey, y'all, I want to get high, man. And then for some reason, the thought leaves. It's not a good idea. And that's in the here and now.
Thank you, Mr. White. We'll be happy to take questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Yet I've never heard the fact of the drug court brought up. I've gotten involved with reporting the children to DSS, having the children taken away, and yet I've never heard of the drug courts.
I guess it depends on where they're charged and in what court they're charged in, and whether or not a court is available and set up in that particular jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction is different, but it sounds like it would be a worthy.
Yeah, these are state.
State.
Greenville County, Spartanburg County, Union County, Oconee County.
Well, they're available. They are available in Greenville County and Spartanburg County, and but
can you refer to these courts? I mean, if
I think you should call the clerk of court in those jurisdictions and see what programs they have available, and perhaps the person's lawyer can explore that for their client.
the effect on the children is just devastating.
See a question in the back.
Mr. White, I have a question for you. When you were convicted the second time and was going to go to Kentucky, did you join the bridge because you thought it was the lesser of the evils, or did you really want to get clean and go on and be a productive part of society? So which way was it?
To be honest with you, I didn't want to go back to prison.
So you thought it was the lesser of the two evils?
Yeah,
at that time.
Yeah, I didn't want to go back to prison. I said, well, let me try this, you know.
But you got clean in the process.
And I got clean in the process and learned some things about myself in the process.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. White, I think your story about yourself as a 12-year-old, I'm sure that's repeated countless times. How can we, as a society, stop young children getting a hold of drugs and getting addicted? To start back at the beginning instead of...
That's a real good question, ma'am.
Be always present. Be the parent that searches through backpacks and says, I'm going through your closet. Just be always present. Because any adolescent that has 5 minutes time without supervision, they're going to do it. And it's only going to take them very little time to get addicted. So just always be present.
Me, myself, I have a daughter. My daughter 15, right? And I talked to her about addiction, and I asked her questions about, when she's in high school, and I know that they get high. You understand me? So I say, hey, what if one of your friends offer you some weed or something? What you gonna do? And she'll tell me honestly, So it's more just being open with the kids as a parent, Because see, I didn't have that. My mama was, but my father got killed when I was 12. So that kind of had a lot to do with me using, you know what I'm saying? But just being there and talking to a child. I just share my own experience. That's what I really do. Well, Daddy went to prison. You ain't want to go to prison, That's how you. That's my only experience, because I don't like to give advice to get somebody killed. Experience to get you through.
Wise. Yes, sir.
For both participants, what do you think about the current trend nationally to decriminalize certain drugs?
I'm actually all for it. I mean, it's just, not all drugs, obviously, but it would, is the 16-year-old that sells a bag of weed on the corner, does he deserve 5 to 8 years in prison, in jail? I don't know. But people like me, I might have deserved it, before the drug court. I mean, there's so many different aspects to that question that can be picked apart. Say, yes, maybe this, maybe not that, but...
I'm sorry. I like to think before I say anything. I'm sorry. I don't have no experience in that because I was young, and stuff, but I know as for decriminalizing, drugs are starting to become legal nowadays. You understand me? You know, so myself, I kind of be like, well, I'm in recovery. This is crazy. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, I feel for the people who are in recovery who take that chance to want to use since it's legal now, you know, or whatever. So I don't know. That's a hard question for me to answer, sir, to be honest, yeah.
Yes, sir, gentleman in the middle in the back, right there, yeah.
This is kind of more for the judge. Ma'am, I just wanted to ask whether or not, you said that heroin tends to be a problem and it's kind of linked through painkillers and such. So I just wanted to ask if the problem was more with the opiates instead of the actual heroin.
The opiates are definitely the gateway drug.
And like more linked to
heroin.
it from the Opana aspect especially.
Yes, there is a definite link from the opiates, prescription opiates to heroin. In our colleges and universities and schools, it's shocking. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
How much awareness do you feel there is within the medical profession of the kinds of addictions that you fell prey to? I have a son who's been a high school teacher for 25 years in a nice suburban district in the state of New York. And he says he's seen a change over that time, that today prescription drug addiction is the major problem in the schools. Kids going through their parents' medicine cabinets and just clearing out whatever they can find and bringing it to school. So it's a big problem.
Our physicians these days are very quick to write a prescription. You know, you go to the hospital, you get stitches in your finger, you get a week's worth of Lortab. I know the hospitals and institutions are always, they're constantly changing and trying to get more safe so people like me can't steal the drugs anymore, but an addict will find a way around that, and we do. So, but as far as they're easy. You can go online and order them. Honestly, you can order prescription medications online. There are doctors that you can pay them, $100 every 6 weeks to give you a new prescription for 90 days. The legislation needs to change on that, but yeah, absolutely. It's easy to get. Easy.
What were you addicted to again?
I was addicted to Dilaudid and painkillers and amphetamines. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
How much of either one of you believe in the statement that legalization of marijuana will lead to heavier types of addiction, heroin, cocaine? Personally.
You would answer. I honestly think it's going to decrease the amount of criminal activity caused by addiction.
You feel that if you use marijuana, that would lead you to use opiates and other drugs?
Absolutely not.
Is there a question back here? Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to speak to the decriminalization aspect. It sounds like to me that the drug court is treating addicts as health problems. The addicted people, it's a health problem. And I was reading about Uruguay. In that country, they've started treating heroin addicts. They don't put them in jail. They treat them as health problems. So I think that's an important aspect.
Thank you very much. Okay. I think that's everything. We done? Okay. We'll take a break.